Hi guys, welcome everyone. My name is Vera. If we haven't met before, I will be your instructor for tonight, and this is the painting that we're going to be painting today. It is super pretty and it is super fun, and I'm going to be doing this in watercolor. You're more than welcome to use an acrylic paint as well if you don't own a set of watercolors and just work in a watercolor technique using an acrylic paint. Totally fine, you're allowed to do that, so no problem. If you do own a watercolor set, even better, work in watercolor. Now guys, this is a video recording, so the way it's designed for you to pause it as needed and go at your own pace. So I would say if you find that the pace is comfortable, you can definitely just go along with me and paint together and you don't have to pause anything. But because we all work at our own pace, and maybe this is your first time painting in watercolor, maybe this is your first time painting in a while, or maybe this is your first time painting ever. So if you find that you would rather go a little bit slower and maybe do this over the course of a couple of days even, you can definitely do that. So just feel free to pause this video as needed. And also, the video will stay on our YouTube right here pretty much forever. So if something comes up and you can't do it today, or you have to go, you get interrupted by some urgent business that you need to attend to, that's okay. You'll always be able to come back here and do it at your own convenience. So all right, let's go through all our supplies to make sure we have everything that we need for today. First thing you're going to need is a paper. I am using watercolor paper, and I highly recommend to use specifically watercolor paper of any brand, any size. What I'm using is just regular paper that I got from Michael's. It's not even a fancy one, it's just a regular artist loft paper, and it's 9 by 12 inch. So you can stick with the same size what I'm doing here, or you can go bigger or smaller, completely up to you. The only difference is you may need to adjust the size of your brushes accordingly. So if you go with a bigger size, you might want to use a bigger brushes. If you go smaller, you may want to skip the large brush that I'm going to be using today and use just the smaller ones. But yeah, again, any brand, any size will do, as long as it is watercolor paper or multimedia paper. That will also work, even though I still would recommend the watercolor paper. When I was making this painting originally, I did not add a border. I didn't tape my um, paper to the table, and to be honest with you, I do regret it, because A, I don't have that beautiful frame, it looks a little bit like a messy edge, and B, I did find it very uncomfortable because, you know, as you can see, the filling goes pretty much to the edge. So I just found that it was very uncomfortable because paper would, you know, go all wavy. So this time I would definitely be taping my paper to my table, and I highly recommend that you do the same. So that's pretty much what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to put this one aside, by the way. You can always refer to this image on your screen right here. It's going to be right there the entire time, so it's not going anywhere. So I'm going to start by taping this. And I would always recommend this for like a full fill paintings, when you're filling your paper almost fully or fully. When you have just like one element or two in the middle, I don't think that's necessary. But when you have paint from edge to edge, yeah, this makes your life so much easier. And it does add visually to it too, because it creates a beautiful white frame. Alright, now that I have everything taped, so let's go through the rest of our supplies. So we're going to need a pencil because we're going to start with a sketch. We're going to sketch out our dog, we're going to sketch out the mountains. We are not going to sketch out the tree and the branches unless you really want to, but I would probably advise against it because it's just unnecessary. You can easily freehand that, but still, grab a pencil, grab a watercolor paint of any kind. So you can use more of like a basic set, let's say a 6 or 12 hour colors Crayola set, or you can use more of a elaborate set like what I have here. This is what I'm going to be using. This is my very standard set. This is what I use for most of my events, even though I have lots of other watercolors at home too. This is just my set of preference right now. This is Koi watercolor palette, and it's hard to see here what's what, so I'm going to be showing you the colors on this one. But really, guys, this is a super simple painting when it comes to color. All you need is 1 or 2 different shades of red. If you have more of a basic palette, just 1 red is plenty, is more than enough. If you have more of an elaborate palette like what I do, 2 sets of red are good. I'm going to be using this one and this one, because this one, as you can see, is a darker red, and this one is like a fiery borderline orange red. Another thing you're going to need is orange and yellow. So for me, I have this orange that I'm going to be using. It's like yellowy orange, and I have an actual yellow. So, I mean, any yellow will do. Any orange will do too. So I have another orange just like that, but I kind of prefer this one because I find that this one a little too close to the red. But really, again, either one of them is great, and maybe we'll mix some oranges along the way. Plus, you're going to need black and potentially brown. That's all you need today. Black, brown, any brown will do, like this one is perfect. This one will be okay too. Black, important. Yellow, orange, red. That's all. If you want to incorporate any other colors that I don't have, awesome, go for it. Make it your own. But just, yeah, again, super simple, yellow, orange, red, black. Those are must for colors. And then optionally you can have second shade of red, and you can have optional orange and, optional brown. That's pretty much all. So let's put this aside. We're not going to do this just yet, because we're going to start with the sketch. And of course, you're going to need a watercolor tray of some kind, because you never go from your palette straight onto the paper. You always go watercolor palette, whether it's a dry palette like I had, or tubes, whatever paint you're using. On a tray, you mix it to a consistency that you're going to use, and only then you actually use it on your paper. So it's always paint, mixed to consistency, then paper. So make sure you have that. You can use just regular plate too. It doesn't have to be a tray made for watercolor paint. Of course, you're gonna need some water and paper towel, always a must. If you don't have paper towel, or if you prefer to be more conscious of the waste that you create, you can use reusable fabric cloth. That will work really well as well. It doesn't have to be specifically a paper towel, just something to dab your brush on. And of course, we're going to need a couple different brushes. As far as brushes, I always recommend using 3 different brushes, large, medium, and small. And for watercolor, it's always best when you use the pointy brushes. So something larger, pointy. So for me, I'm going to grab this one. It's always best when you use a soft bristle pointy brushes for watercolor. So this one is number 14 if you go by numbers, but again, I honestly skip the number, just something bigger. And if you don't have soft bristle pointy brushes, that's okay. On the bigger sizes, it doesn't matter. It's still recommended to have a soft bristle pointy brushes, but if they're not, that's not a problem. So something large, then something medium. In my case, I'm going to go with number 8. Again, soft bristle pointy brush. And then for the detailed, something small, you see, with a pointy tip. Ideally, number 1, number 0, number 2. In my case, this is actually number 3 even. even though I would not recommend them unless you have a really good number 3. In my case, you see this is a long bristle brush with a pointy tip, so really I could even use number 6 and it will still work. But yes, try generally to stay around number 1, number 2, or zeros for this. That would be the best. And that's pretty much it. That's my set. Now I'm going to put that aside too, and we're going to start with a sketch. So for our sketch, we're going to start by positioning our horizon line. I would say it should be at about the middle of our paper. That's safe to say. So we're just going to put one horizontal line in about the middle of our paper. So something like that. Then after that, I'm going to sketch our mountains. So they're not going to meet in the middle. They're going to meet somewhere here. So this is going to be a taller one, and there's going to be a shorter one right here too. I'm going to start somewhere here. It's up to you what shape it's going to be and what height it's going to be. So that's one. And then I'll leave a little gap, and then I'll add second one. It's a little shorter, or maybe not as tall. But yeah, those are my two mountains. Then after that, I'm going to sketch my dog. Now, if you have a ruler, you can use it, but honestly, it's not that big that you have to have a ruler. And what we're going to do, I'm going to identify where the top of my dog is going to be, and I'm going to sketch that first. And I would say the top of my dog is going to be somewhere here. So I'm just going to put one totally flat horizontal line for the width that I would like it to be. And then from here, I'm going to add two lines. They're going to be on somewhat of the same angle, just opposite directions. Going down. So one on this side. And one on this side. And what you could do to make your life easier and to make sure it's kind of more symmetrical, you can put a little line straight, so just straight vertical line right in the middle of your dog to see whether those lines are actually the same, because that will help you to gauge whether, you know, your dog is one side bigger, one side smaller, what is going on specifically with your dog. And then you can adjust accordingly. So that's up to you. This is optional, but you could do that. If they're not exactly the same, that's okay. I wouldn't probably just go with a ruler and measure it all out. It just means you're not standing exactly in the middle of the dog. If one side is bigger, one side is smaller, it just means your perspective is slightly different. It means you're standing a little bit more to the left or to the right of the dog, and that would change the angle. So either way, it works out in the end. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. All right. And after that, I'm going to add those lines on a dog. So the goal with the lines is that we need to slightly increase the gap between the lines as we go towards us. So the first line is going to be fairly close to the back line. And then as you move closer and closer and closer, you slightly, just so slightly, increase the gap in between your lines. size. It's something along those lines, so something like that. And then I'm gonna add the posts on the sides. I'm gonna add 3 posts on each side. So I'm gonna do a post here. Remember, no matter how much tempted you would be to put them on an angle of some kind, they have to be straight vertical. There's gonna be one straight vertical post here, and one somewhere closer to us. So maybe like right here, and one super close. And they should be getting a little bit wider as well, because whatever is close to us always looks bigger. And then I'm going to add the same on the other side. Same goal, just vertical. All right, then we have our sketch. I'm not going to be sketching the, those plants that are coming on the sides here, and I'm not going to be sketching the tree. And of course, I'm not going to be sketching my clouds either. So this is all that I'm going to be sketching. So whenever you have it, you can put aside your pencil and an eraser. And we're going to move to painting. And guys, again, if you need to pause it and just perfect your sketch before we move any further, please do that. And I'm going to have a sip of my actually super color matching for this painting tea. Well, that wasn't intentional, but it worked out. All right, and what I'm going to start with, I'm going to start with the base for my sky first, then for my bottom, for my water. So for the sky, I'm going to start with yellows. So I'm going to go yellow there. Then I'm going to go orange. Then I'm going to go with reds. I'm going to use pretty much all my colors except probably black on the first round. But I'm going to start by putting them all on my palette because as I mentioned earlier, we don't work from our, paint straight to the paper. We work paint to palette and then to paper. And there's going to be a lot of layers here, guys. So we're not trying to get everything right from the first layer. This is one of those paintings that we're going to need to do layer, dry, another layer, dry, another layer, and so on. It's going to be quite a few layers. And even in the end, we're going to add a smidge of white acrylic or white ink, something white. So I'm going to start with just adding yellow. Any yellow will do. There's no particular yellow that you have to use. My yellow right here. And we're going to go quite saturated right away. Even though we're going quite saturated, remember this is a watercolor painting. Or if you're using acrylic, then you're going to do watercolor technique painting. So use a generous amount of water. It's still a watercolor, so don't be stingy with your water. You need to have a plenty of that. Then I'm going to grab my orange. As I mentioned earlier, I'm going to use my light orange. Do you see? It's like an orange mixed with yellow, I would say. It's more like a standard orange mixed with yellow because it's a little bit on the yellower side versus the redder side. So just grab any orange. Any orange will do. And again, put lots of it in your palette. And even this is not going to be enough. So as I go, I will be making more of it. Then I'm going to put my red, my actual, that fire red that I showed you earlier. So right now I'll put this color on. I'll put this color on. This is my yellow. This is my orange. And I'm going to put my fire red, the one that has like almost a tint of orange. It really is like a fire truck color. That's the best, closest color that I could probably compare it to. And then I'm going to put my second red. So do you remember I mentioned that I'm going to use darker red as well? In my case, it's this one. If you don't have a darker red, you can either grab more saturated, this one, for your darker red, or you can grab this plus a smidge of black, or even a smidge of purple potentially, and use that as your darker red. But from what I know, even the simpler watercolor palettes usually have more than one red. So just use whichever your second red is. And again, get every single color pretty saturated. Alright, so my beautiful palette is ready. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to start by actually watering down my whole top. You can get on all the mountains, that's fine. We're not going to add mountains until all of that dries anyway, so totally fine. Just water down the whole thing. Then I'm going to start with my yellow. I'm going to take a bit of my yellow. I'm going to go right here. And then I'm going to increase the saturation of my yellow. I'm still going to go up with it. You see? Bringing it up, up, up. Then I'm going to take a bit of my orange. And somewhere around here, I'm going to introduce my orange into this. I'm going to bring it all up, especially in the middle. So you see it needs to be quite wet because all of this needs to be able to merge and, you know, do its watercolor magic thing. Again, I'm going to take a bit more yellow, more saturated, and I'm even going to add a bit more from here. So keeping the bottom a little bit lighter, just slightly. I'm going to be moving my camera, sorry, my light a little bit here and there, just so you can see it without the glitter. So it may get a little dimmer at times, but that's just so you can see without a glare. After that, I'm going to grab just a little bit of my darker red. I'm just going to fill up the bottom. Make a little base here. Now, whenever you want to merge your colors, you can just wash off your brush, dab it off on a paper towel, and with a clean, slightly wet brush, you can go ahead and just merge your colors. Okay, all this needs to be done on wet, and we are not done. Let's keep going. Now, I'm going to grab my fire truck red, and I'm going to go right here, and I'm going to add my first clouds while everything is still wet. So try to do this fairly fast, I would say, because you don't want to do this on dry. So if you find that by the time you do this, everything dried, wet it again. Just take more water and go over it one more time and just wet everything again. So I'll put it right here, and I'm not going to touch it for a second. Now I'm going to take more of my fire truck red, and I'm going to do my second layer of clouds. I'm just going to let them spread and do their own thing, whatever they want to do there. And then I'm going to go ahead and add my third layer of clouds on the top. So the same thing. All on wet. And now, again, right away, because we want to finish first layer on wet. I'm going to grab more of my darker red. So do you see I kind of use it all up? So I'm going to quickly grab lots more of it, saturate it, still using plenty of water, because it's all wet on wet technique here for the first layer. Everything's on wet. It may be messy, and that's okay. And I'm just going to add a little bit of that. So on the first layer, just like a little couple dots. On the second one, a little bit more. On the third one, lots more. You see, I'm letting it do its own thing without maneuvering it manually yet. So here too, I'm going to just a touch on the first layer, a little bit more on the second one, and a lot more on the third one. And then after this, I'm going to wash off my brush, dab it off, get rid of extra water on a paper towel. Don't dry it, just get rid of extra water. And now I'm going to go ahead and maybe slightly merge my colors. And I'm going to be washing my brush every now and then because it gets dirty fast. You might want to use it like one time, twice, do a brush stroke or two, and then wash it off again and dab it off on a paper towel before you continue using it. So let me move my, do you see I'm moving my lamp? This is what's happening, beauty. Like this is ideal if this happens. It doesn't have to look exactly like that, but maneuver it to a minimum. Let it spread how it would. If it spreads different, that's okay. Let it be. We want to control it as least as possible because then we'll lose the beauty of watercolor when we control it too much. So I'm happy with it. It doesn't look exactly like originally because again, you can't recreate something like identically in watercolor twice. It's just impossible because that's the medium, that the beauty of it that it will be unique every single time. So you don't want to do that either. So again, I'm super happy with it. I'm going to let it be and I'm going to move on to my bottom. And then on the second layer, I'm going to define it and add darkness where it needs to be darker and add maybe a little bit more orange because I feel like I kind of lost my orange. I don't see much of it. So we'll see. We'll work more on what's missing and what to add on a second layer. First layer, I have it exactly how I want it. I see quite a bit of cloudiness. I have the intensity of color, and that's great. And even if you don't have intensity from the first layer, that's okay. You can always build the intensity as we add layers. However, for this particular painting, you don't want to start super light pastel colors either. You want to go quite intense from the beginning because we're trying to build this really intense color towards the end. So again, I mean, if it's not a big deal and deal breaker if you did go with the pastel colors. It just means you're gonna need to have another layer to build that intensity. But ideally, go quite intense, especially on this upper side, even on the first layer. So great. I'm gonna move to my bottom. Now I'm gonna try to avoid my dog for now, or at least that's the hope. If you don't completely avoid it and you get some paint on it, totally not a big deal, don't worry about it, but just try to your best to avoid it. And what we're going to do with the water is we're going to use all the same colors in pretty much all the same order. It's just we're not going to do the cloudiness. It's going to be more like a smooth blending that we tried to create in the first layer. So you can wet it or you don't have to. I probably would still recommend wetting it and working wet on wet just avoid the dark. You don't have to avoid the dark poles because they're going to be done in black, and black goes over anything. It's like a perfect cleanup color, so you can just cover anything with black. So just start by watering down everything that needs to be wet. But I'm still using my large brush for both, for the sky and for the base for my water. Now I'm going to start with my quite intense yellow. And I'm going to start right here, especially if you're working on wet. You want to go quite intense because when you work on wet, your colors does get diluted by the water that's already applied onto your surface. So you always want to go quite intense with your color. All right, then I'm going to move to my orange, the yellowy orange. This one. And I'm going to bring it second layer. And you see I'm kind of mostly bringing it from the edges. So yeah, I'm going to bring some on the middle too, but we want to have more of it from the edge. Then my super intense fire truck red. Beautiful color. I love this color so much. I'm actually going to go right to the bottom with that. I'm going to marginally blend it a little bit. I'm going to flip some from the edge here, bring it a little higher. Then I will go on the other side. And then I'm going to add a little bit of, oh, when I say a little bit, I don't mean in saturation. It's still going to be very saturated, but more in amount. A little bit of my dark red, so the second red. And again, on this particular step, I wouldn't recommend maneuvering it too much. If you want to, you could. Now you can wash off your brush, dry it off on a paper towel. Well, not dry, really, dab it off on a paper towel so it's a little bit drier and not so wet, right? So it doesn't drip paint. And you can go and just smudge some, create some blending in between your colors, but it's not necessary either. So if you don't, well, then it's fine. Again, not a big deal either way. If you do it, great. If you don't do it, great. Okay, so I have my first layer on my water, I have my first layer on my top, but what I don't have first layer on is dark, and I could technically add dark, but you have to be super careful, and the reason why I say that, You don't want, if this is so super, super wet, don't do your dark yet because you don't want this red to blend and bleed into your light side of the dark here. So I probably would say wait a couple minutes until this is dry because we just added it, right? So it's not dry yet. It can't really be dry yet. So I would say give it some time to dry, just a little bit longer. It doesn't have to be super long, just a little bit longer is more than enough. But what I could do is I could probably start working back on my clouds. And again, see for yourself, if your clouds are still wet, give them time to dry. Don't rush through this. In my case, they're dry except with a couple small pools of water here and there. So you see I moved my light again back there and it doesn't glare. So they're all dry except for like there's a pool of water here, there that have slight areas that are not dry. So I could technically start working on them, but also I don't want to take my chances either, to be honest. I want it to look good in the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause this video because that's a beauty of video recording. You can pause it. And I'm going to give my painting a good 2-3 minutes. It dries really fast. I would say 5-minute tops to dry those pools of water. And then I'm going to resume the recording and we're going to jump right back in. And I would suggest you guys do the same unless you're painting just generally much slower than I do and you find that by the time you got to this point your sky is dry, in which case just continue going, no problem. And I will see you guys in what will feel like a second to you. Alright guys, I am back and my painting is much drier right now than what it was before. Actually dried up and top and the bottom, but I'm going to continue working on it and I'm going to go up first. So again, I'm going to use my large brush, but you could technically at this point switch to medium. Now here are your options of what you can do next. You can do what I'm doing, so it's going to be more of a partial coverage, or you can do the exact same thing over again if you want it super saturated. Your first layer maybe is not as saturated, then you can do the whole thing, the entire thing over again. In my case, my first layer is quite saturated. The only feel what I'm missing here is I feel like I'm missing a bit of orange. I would like a little bit more orange. And of course, I'm still going to build the darkness of my clouds. So this is what I'm personally going to work on here. But again, if you feel like everything could use a bit of saturation, then add the entire thing again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with my yellow, but I'm not going to be adding it everywhere in my orange. I'm going to put those two colors on my palette. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to take my yellow, and I'm going to go just like right here. Do you see, adding a couple of brush strokes. Let me move my lamp. Again, it's going to be a little bit dimmer, but you're not going to see the glare. That's what I'm trying to get rid, so you can see. I'm going to add it right here, not everywhere. And then I'm going to add a bit of orange here too right away. And a bit more yellow maybe, right in the middle, and a bit more orange. But not all the way to the top, mostly just this area. And then of course, right away, I'm going to wash off my brush, dab it off on a paper towel, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to clean the edge. So the edge of my brush strokes, I'm going to merge it with just with the water into the rest of the background. So wherever you see the edge of your brush stroke, just go right over that edge with the water so it merges it into your background. Do you see? And now I'm going to grab more of my second, that darker red. Because I feel like I have enough of the fire truck red. I don't really need it. Again, if I didn't have enough of it, I would be adding it, but I do feel like I do have enough of it. So I'm only going to take my second red, this darker red, and again, I'm just going to add a couple brush strokes here. You see, I'm not blending them right away. I'm just adding them as a brush strokes first. That's why I say it's a partial coverage here. It's not a full coverage. And now I'm going to wash off my brush, dab it off on a paper towel, and with a clean wet brush, I'm going to go around it. And you see I smudged the edge of that brush stroke so it doesn't look like, you know, just a blob. So it actually blends into my background. It merges into my background. And I'm washing my brush after every single one. You see, I washed it off, clean the brush, did it again. Clean the brush, did it again. Clean the brush, did it again. So merged it, clean brush, merged it, clean brush, and so on. And you see, beautiful merging. And now I actually need to switch because this is soaked through. It doesn't absorb any more water. So I'm going to grab another piece of paper towel that still have absorbing abilities. And I'm going to add my third layer. That's going to be the dark mixed with black. So I'm going to grab this dark color. And again, you can use a large brush or medium brush, whichever. Dark red, and add a bit of black to it, or brown, whichever you prefer. I'm just going to add black. Just a little bit. And I'm going to add just a touch of that. Feel a little bit more on the upper ones and less as you go down. And again, you can either keep it as is or you can wash off your brush, dab it off on a paper towel, and go ahead and, you know, just kind of merge it a little bit into the background. It's just a wet brush. Alright, I'm happy. I'm happy with my sky. I don't want to be adding anything to it. I'm super excited about it. Now I'm going to move to my dock. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a blending from the right side being yellow and the left side being orange. That's going to be my starter base blending here. So again, I'm going to need yellow and I'm going to need orange, but I'm going to go slightly darker for my orange. So I'm going to grab yellow. I'm not going to go too saturated on my yellow. I think I'm going to go like a medium. So you see, it's light and it's visibly yellow, but it's not, you know, crazy yellow like my tape on the sides. So I'm going to do that on my right, and for my left, I'm going to go orange, but I'm going to add a smidge of red to it to make it a little bit more saturated, like a redder orange. I'm going to add that as a base, but again, not too saturated either. Like, we're not trying to have the color intensity that we would have for our background. And regardless how you added it, I'm going to go then later with horizontal brush strokes and merge them. So then I don't have any vertical brush stroke in this here. Everything needs to be horizontal here. Alright, I'm happy with it. I'm going to let it dry, because again, I can't do anything on it until it dries. But as it's drying, I'm going to add second layer on my water. So that's where I'm going to switch my brush. I'm going to put my large brush aside. Make sure you wash it first. Dab it off on a paper towel, put it aside, and we're gonna grab our medium brush. Here's my medium brush, I'll dip it in the water. And now I'm gonna go with my orange color. I'm gonna grab that light orange. So how saturated, it really depends. You need it to be visible on this. So you don't have to go crazy saturated, but you could as well. I would say this is more of an optional. So you see, this is light. I personally want to go a little more saturated. I want it a bit more visible. Oh yeah, this is good. And I'm going to start adding brush strokes from the right to the left here, flicking them, some longer, some shorter. You want to keep quite light area generally right here, so don't overfill it with your orange. And go down for as long as you can see it. Once it disappears, once you go into the thread sections where you, even though you add it, you can't see it anymore, you can stop. You don't have to continue going down because there's no point, you're just not going to see it. And on this step, and here on the other side, I'm going to flick from the left to the right. So you're flicking from the outside towards the middle, basically, regardless of which side you're working on. You see I do some larger brush strokes closer to the edges and some smaller ones closer to the middle too. It's like a combination of a longer and a shorter brush strokes. I'll maybe a couple smaller ones here too. But just a few, because again, I would like to reserve that to be my lightest area overall. So great, you see I have my orange. Now I'm going to move to my red. I'm going to grab my fire truck red and I'm going to go lower with that. Then I'm going to go quite saturated. And I'm going to go lower, and I'm not going to start as high up, but I'm going to start where it's going to be visible. So somewhere around this orange section. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to flick it from the outside in, bring it a little bit higher on the edges. Not all the way up, I don't need to go that high up. On the side, I'll bring it all the way up though, because the side is generally a little bit darker, because our lightest section is around here, right? So it's okay to bring it higher on my left. And then I'm going to move to my darkest red, and I'll do the same thing starting lower with my darkest red. This one not mixed with black, just my darkest red. If you didn't have darkest red and you're making it by mixing black, that's okay, then continue going with whatever you did before. And I'm going to start somewhere here. So orange I started here, red I started here. This one I'm going to start lower. So every darker color you start a little bit lower. all the way to the bottom. I'm gonna add some on the other side too. Again, on this side, I'll probably bring it a little bit higher overall. Great. And now I'm gonna do this mixed with black. So if you actually had a dark red, now it's gonna be the first time you're gonna be mixing it with black for the bottom part. If you didn't have dark red and you were mixing with black already, you're just gonna add a bit more black. Or brown, optionally, if you prefer to have more warmer undertone to it. And I'm gonna start by just adding at the very bottom a couple lines, so darkening this bottom up a bit. And then you can go a little bit higher up on the right, flicking it from the right towards the left, right on the edge. But you can also make a bit of a shadow falling from the dog, so add a line, take a tiny line on the right of the dog, and then flick it from there towards, from left to right, basically. With flicks being smaller higher up, and then them getting a little bit longer as you go down. And now it looks almost black here, but really it's like a beets color. I'm going to show you a closer look here too on my palette. So this is the color I'm using, you see? It's like beets. That's what it looks like, the beets vegetable. Well, I guess it's a root actually. It's not a vegetable. Or root vegetable, whatever that is. You know what I'm talking about. And here I'm going to do it from the line. So I'm going to add the line again. And I'm going to flip it towards the edge. From right to left. All right, that looks really good. Now we can move on to the actual dog. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take orange. So a little bit of that light orange, but I'm going to make it a little bit redder. So I'm going to mix it with some red, with just a touch redder. And again, I'm not going too saturated either. And with this color, I'm going to flick it on every section like this. Pretty much almost all the way or almost all the way closer to the line. See a couple flicks, but with longer flick being closer to the line or on that line. Then I'm gonna make the same mix again. So I'm gonna take my yellow, I'm gonna add a smidge of red, and this time I'm gonna add a smidge of black or brown, whichever you prefer. I'm gonna do black, but just like a little smidge, so it turns like orangey brown, I would say. And again, not super saturated, but we're gonna add a flick of that and less than what we did in orange. See, we're just darkening it up, darkening it and darkening it and darkening it. All right, this looks pretty good. Okay, so now I kind of want to switch to even a smaller brush. So let's go with my small one. And at this point I can grab a darker red or a mixture of any red with black. And not super saturated either. I'm going to add more lines here, but just do see they're a little bit finer. They're not as long, I would say, overall. And maybe I will go even a little bit darker and add like a small outline, super, super fine. All right, looking good. So I'm pretty happy with the duck. If you want to add a bit more shadow, you absolutely can just add another layer or two wherever you feel like it's should have it. I'm happy with this amount of shadow, so I'm gonna stop. And at this point, I'm gonna move on to my mountains. So I'm gonna grab my medium brush. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna make a mixture of orange. So I'm gonna grab orange here. And I'm gonna add a little bit of black to it. So orange and black. And I'm gonna start with that. So I'm gonna do one mountain at a time, by the way. Maybe orange and black. Then right away, I'm gonna take red. This needs to be done on wet, so I'm gonna take my red, any red you wanna do, and add a little bit of black to it as well. And we're gonna continue here with the red and black mixture and blend it into orange and black as well. And then I'm going to do my dark red. Mixed with a little bit of black as well. So I'll finish the bottom here and I'll blend it into my upper colors. So that's for my one mountain, and then I'm going to do the same thing for my second mountain because I still have all my colors on my palette, right? So starting with orange mixed with a touch of black, then bright red mixed with a touch of black, and then that dark red mixed with a touch of black. And do it all in wet. Great, and now I'm going to add the reflection. So reflection, I'm going to start again. I'm going to do all three colors. So I'm going to start with orange mixed with a touch of black. And I'm going to add a couple of brush strokes right underneath using that color. On both sides. Then I'm going to go to my, you can use small brush or medium brush. I'm going to continue using my medium brush for this. My actual red, my bright red mixed with a touch of black. And then with that, I'm going to add it a little bit more underneath, so a little bit further. On the other side too. And then I'm going to go with my dark red mixed with black, and I'm going to finish it. Really beautiful. Oh, probably should move my mug. And then I'm going to go with straight black. So the rest I'm going to do just black and white. So I'm going to let that dry a little bit. And as it's drying, I'm going to go on to my top here. So let's dedicate a spot to a straight black on my palette. I'll use the same spot, why not? And you can use, we're going to start by adding branches here. So you can use either medium or small brush. I find that because my brush has a really pointy tip, I can get away with using still a medium brush and just push harder for the wider areas and let go for the areas that I want thinner. But if you prefer, you can use smaller brush. You can add a couple of branches. You see, wherever I push harder, my branch gets wider, and then whenever I push less on my brush, because it has a pointy tip, it gives me a super, super fine line. So you can add a couple of branches, as many as you want. You can have 1, 2, 300 branches, totally up to you. Or you can add a couple large ones with like a medium brush, and then you can switch to a small brush and add the rest with just a small brush. But the important thing with the branches is you always want to add them starting where they grow from. So for example, if my branch grows from the larger branch, right, the small branch comes out from the larger branch, I will always bring it from that branch out, never the other way around. Because usually where you start, you automatically, your hand pushes a little bit harder. So you're going to end up with having a wider brush strokes there. But it's always good to have wider brush strokes where your branch is growing from, because that's what they naturally are like. They are wider where they grow from. So always do that. Don't go from the outside in, go from the inside out. So from where it grows out. Again, add as many as you want. You may not see all of them in the end, and you likely will not see all of them in the end. So I wouldn't worry about that too much, but of course you want to get the amount that you want in case you do see some of them. You try to get quite fine ends, quite fine tips to your branches. Then I'm going to wash off my brush and go back to my medium one. Grab a bit more black here, and I'm just going to start dabbing. I usually start dabbing with the larger dabs, or you can do small brush strokes too. It doesn't have to be dabbing, it could be brush stroking if you prefer that technique. So either dabbing or brush stroking, let's say try both and see which one fits better, fits your painting better. And I usually add larger ones around just this base of a tree, and then the smaller ones closer to the tip. So do you see here? I'm not going to be adding those massive ones, right? Because then I'm just covering up all my beautiful branches, and especially I want to see some of those beautiful end tips. And with filling in this tree, I would say pretty good. There are going to be a lot of leaves there. We're just going to fill it up. And I'm saying just add as much as you want until you're happy with it, which in my case, I'm quite happy already. Now I'm going to add a bit of black here, but only if it's dry. So let me show you how. It's a tricky one. So I'm going to take some black on my medium brush, and I'm going to add it right on the bottom of my mountain here, like this. You see? And then I'm going to wash off my brush right away, dab it off on a paper towel, and with a clean wet brush, I'm going to blend it up with just water. And now you see it creates a gradient that goes to black. And I'm going to do the same on a second mountain. I'm going to add it on the bottom of the mountain. And I'm going to wash off my brush, dab it off my paper towel, and gradient it. So basically create a gradient and wash it off towards the upper part with just clean brush and water. And then you can grab a small brush or continue with a medium brush. I'm going to switch to a small one probably. And with the small one, we're just going to add a couple brush strokes in black underneath. We're not trying to get too much of the black here, but just like a few for the reflection. All right, this is good. Now I'm going to continue on to my dog. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna start by adding my poles in black. So those support poles, just gonna add them in black. I'm gonna add a little outline on my sides. So it's a line on the left and a line on the right in black. And then I'm gonna flick a little bit towards the side from that line. So here, not everywhere, I'm not gonna start too high up, so maybe like right here. Just a couple flicks down here. And right here too, I'm not gonna start too high up, so somewhere right here. Couple flicks from the inside out. And now I'm gonna add a bit of a shadow from the poles as well. So that's where you want to use slightly more watered down black. So don't use it as solid, I would say here. Try to use it a bit more watered down. And we're going to add a bit of, out of brush strokes like this, two small brush strokes, you build this. You see the reflection on the water, shadow slash reflection in the water, and here too. And here the shadow is going to go on the actual dot. Just make sure it's not a super solid black. Looks like it's super solid black, but it's not. See, it's a little more transparent than that. That's what you want. You can even wash it off with just water later. Alright, and now I'm going to add a bit of black right here too. Not a crazy amount, but solid black. So solid black, small brush, and just a couple of brush strokes. Because our tree would also be reflecting on our water, right? With that black branch that we just added, it needs to have a reflection. But don't overdo it. You don't need too much of it. We already have quite a bit going on there. And then we're going to add our final thing in black, which is going to be our plants that are going from both sides. So I prefer to start with the one on the left just because I'm right-handed, so it always makes logical sense for me to go from here to here. But it doesn't matter, again, wherever you want to start. So I'm going to start by just flicking a couple long and maybe slightly curved ones for the leaves. And I'm going to push my brush a little bit harder so they're not super skinny, so they have a bit of a width to them. And then I'm going to add a couple smaller ones that are super skinny. So do you see super fine lines, very thin? I'm going to add a few of those too. And on the ends of those, I'm going to add a couple little dabs in black. They look like maybe they're cattails, maybe they're some sort of other plant. You see? And then I'm going to do the same thing on the right side. So again, I'm going to start with the leaves. So I'm going to push on my brush a little bit harder so they have width, so they're not just like super skinny and super thin. We'll want them to be a little bit thicker. And just add any curve that you want them to have. And then once you have that, we're going to add a couple of really thin ones. And for thin ones, use just the very tip of your brush. And again, we're going to add a couple little dabs on the ends, or little brush strokes to make that fluffy end. And then we're going to move to white. So I'm going to put aside my watercolor because I'm done with it. Only thing I'm going to use now is going to be white acrylic. You're welcome to use white watercolor if you don't have white acrylic, or you can use white ink if you have that. I probably would recommend white ink or white acrylic over white watercolor, just because they are a little bit more solid and non-transparent white in those things, versus in watercolor where it's more like transparent. So yeah, I personally recommend that, but doesn't matter. Whatever you use, as long as it's some white. I'm gonna put it on my, actually on my palette here, because I don't want to put it on my watercolor tray, and I don't want to start a whole new palette for just like a smidge of white. So I'm gonna do that, and I'm gonna use my small brush. I actually have a small brush specifically for acrylic. I prefer not to mix watercolor brushes with acrylic brushes. That way they last longer. So I'm going to grab my small acrylic brush. I marked it. And I'm going to take a little bit of this white. And I'm going to start by adding a bit of highlight here. So just some white brush strokes horizontal as well. This is optional, by the way, guys. You don't have to have white highlights and it will still look really good. So if you don't have white watercolor or white ink or white acrylic, that's fine. I wouldn't worry about it. Looks fabulous with it. It looks fabulous without it. Right, so that's a little highlight here. I'm going to add a couple dots right here for the stars. We're assuming that there are some stars that are already coming through. Just if you don't overdo this. And then we can add some highlights on our dock. So again, on this right side of the dock, make sure you don't hit them under the shadow. But yeah, not under the shadow on the right side of the dock. Just add a couple of white highlights. And a bit on the poles as well. So on the top right side of each pole, that's where I'm going to add it. That's where the light would be hitting it from. And guys, that's pretty much it, or at least that's it for me. And of course, sign it. Choose a good spot and put your name, your initials, or your signature. Anything that you want. And let's take a good look. Let's untape it and see how it turned out. And by the way, guys, as we untape it, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If this is your first time painting with us, I hope you had lots of fun. Feel free to like this one and subscribe to our channel. We do um, this YouTube free tutorials usually once or twice a week. Sometimes we do YouTube live when you actually interact and communicate with the artist. And sometimes it's a video releases just like this one. We already have lots here that we hosted earlier this year and last year and the year before, so feel free to check that out too. We have acrylic, watercolor, pencil, so all different kinds of mediums. And we would love if you guys would share your results with us. We always look forward to seeing how they turned out. And what you could do is you can take a photo and you can post it on our Facebook group. We have a Facebook group specifically dedicated to people like you and I who love watercolors and love learning and sharing. And it's called Watercolor Lovers by Artist Valley Durham Region. So if you go on Facebook and you type it in the search, it will pop up the group and you can share your results from this particular tutorial or your personal watercolor work. The group is not limited just to our tutorials. You can share your personal watercolor works too and what you've been working on. We would love to see it. And yeah, this is what it turned out. And I really like it. Like this is comparison, no frame, the original one that I made. And here's the one with the frame that I made with you guys today. And I kind of really like it with a frame. So I'm happy with this choice with taped version. But non-taped version is actually not bad too. But I find that this is a cleaner look. And guys, if you enjoyed this tutorial and you want to say thank you by tipping me, I would never say no to that. Tips do really help us to make more tutorials like this for you because they help us to pay our bills. So there's a PayPal link in the description of the video. You can use that to do that. And no tip is too big or too small. Whatever you generously want to give from your heart, we'll take it. But also, don't feel like you have to. It's okay if you don't. So I would leave that up to you, but just know if you wanted to say genuinely thank you, you can use that option to do that. And it would really help us and support us artists and allow us to make more videos like this for you. And again, feel free to share your results. We always look forward to seeing them. I hope you guys had fun painting with me today, and I hope I will get to see some of your beautiful paintings later. Bye everyone. Let's do this again sometime. Bye guys.